teaching. The site is located about 300 meters south of London Wall and in the city of London, of course, and is bounded by Coleman Street to the west, by Moorgate to the east, by Grey Swan Alley to the north. The site during the Roman period is located in the upper Walbrook Valley in the northwestern part of the Londinium. This part of the Londinium remained undeveloped until the Flavian building program of the late 1st, early 2nd century AD. At this time, basically, we saw the development of the amphitheatre, which is located to the southwest of the site, and also the construction of the Cripplegate fort. But there is also an attempt to reclaim this part of Londinium. Possibly because its marginal location, this area of Roman London is known for its industrial activity, mostly associated with glasswork production, but also other activity are present here, leather work, the work of animal bones, and pottery production from 2020 Moorgate, where we got the best evidence for kilns. Of note are the 50 kilograms of glass wastage found at Guildhall yard. The site was located within a modern basement, and the red trenches represented evaluation trenches, which was 6. From this trench, we have found evidence for Roman deposits and post-medieval deposits surviving the modern truncation. The blue area represents the area we'll talk about in this talk. I will just talk about the Roman period, and this period is subdivided in 4 different phases. One of the earliest features excavated was this northwest-southeast orientated ditch. This ditch seems to have been excavated during the early 2nd century AD. It didn't produce much in terms of finds, and it seemed to have silted up with natural washed-in clay and silt. The interpretation for this ditch is likely to be part of a larger network of a drainage ditch associated with the reclamation of this part of London during the early 2nd century AD. However, a more substantial ditch, this time an east-west orientated ditch, was found in a certain limit of excavation. Alongside the certain limit of excavation, this ditch indicated that it was well maintained during the Roman period. The north side of the ditch is represented by very well compacted gravel, which wasn't never been interpreted as natural. The gravel was well compacted with such a compaction which was similar to concrete. The ditch was the gravel was eventually interpreted as a part of a road, an east-west road. And the ditch was, as I said before, maintained during the Roman period. Here we can see the different phase of recut from first phase on the bottom, the second phase where we go like a substantial amount of gravel slumping into the ditch, and then it's followed by the latest phase, which is a later recut, phase 3. Okay, this slide show the early uncovering on the road. This particular photograph show the road on the southeast in the southeast corner of the site. On the left-hand side, we can see a sequence of silty deposits spanning from the post-medieval to the late Roman period, which sealed the road. So the road is possibly, it was actually abandoned during the late Roman period. As we can see, we were not just abandoned, but was also truncated. heavily by a large truncation. Here we can see a larger part of the road being uncovered. As you can see, the road was heavily truncated especially by modern intrusions. Despite this, we were able actually to have an indication of the orientation of the road, which was, as I said before, probably an east-west orientated road. Also, we were able to actually to understand how it was constructed and how many different phases of repair it underwent during the Roman period. The thickness of the road was in excess of 1.10 meter, so it was very well constructed, as I said before. Here we can see the eastern extent of the road, also where it was best preserved, at least at its highest level. Unfortunately, there was no evidence for the north roadside ditch, as this was truncated by a modern modern foundation. So at the moment, it's difficult to actually have an idea how wide it was originally. However, the east-west orientated road, main road, wasn't the only road we found on site. Another, this time narrower road, was found in the central part of the excavation area. This time the road was much better defined, but much less wider. Here we can see the profile of the road with on the side two roadside ditches. Here we can see the road at a later stage of excavation, and the road was orientated northeast southwest and was well constructed. Possibly the gravel surface was much less thick than the east-west road, but here was much better preserved. On the side, you can see more of the roadside ditches, which are in turn truncated by a sequence of postholes lining both sides of the road. Some of these postholes possibly are associated with a wooden structure shuttering to actually keep the gravel in place on the side of the road. Other postholes probably are associated with a construction platform for building fronting each side of the same road. West of the narrow road was also found a north-south orientated ditch. Also, this ditch is very shallow. The ditch is very close to the projected line of a possible north roadside ditch of the east-west road. So it could have been also another drainage ditch connected to the road to the east-west roadside ditch. However, it could have also acted as a boundary ditch during the Roman period. Eventually, this ditch also was silted up with washed-in clay and silt, and eventually was sealed by a sequence of buildings, which we will show in the next slide. Here we can see phase two features. We can see the east-west main road, which we'll talk about at the beginning. We can see the narrow road going and northeast southwest, and you can see the ditch, which is actually projected very closely to the side of the road. So, as I said before, it can be part of a can be originally joined the part of the north roadside ditch of the east-west road. In the northwest part of the excavation area, we have a very interesting sequence of deposits. Sealing ditch 2 was a gravel layer, very compacted, very well constructed, which could have been part of an external yard during the Roman period. This gravel was in turn sealed by the construction of an opus signinum floor, as you can see here. And then during the post-Roman period, the building was completely leveled again, and a bedding layer for the construction of a cobble floor during the 17th century was constructed. So we have two possible phases of a Roman structure, one represented by the gravel, and then later sealed by the construction of a Roman masonry building. More the same masonry building was observed in one of the underpinning trenches. Here we can see two different phases of excavation. On the left-hand side, we can see some of the debris associated with the post-medieval period. And once we remove those debris, we have a much better look at the opus signinum floor, which in this site, in this particular part of the site, is much better preserved. In the northwest corner of the excavation area, we also have we found a very substantial Roman shaft, very deep and wide. Inside the shaft, we have we recovered a large quantity of wall plaster. A very small selection of this wall plaster can be seen in this photograph. The wall plaster seems to be like correspond to a early 2nd century date, and indicate that it was from a high status building. The vicinity of the shaft to the opus signinum floor, it can suggest that this plaster possibly was dumped into the shaft during the late Roman period. So at the moment, we are not sure if this plaster belonged to the same building, but it's being found very close to the floor. So it's quite possible that there is some kind of connection between this plaster and the opus signinum floor. To the south of the opus signinum floor, we also have evidence for clay and timber buildings. Here in this slide, we can actually see in situ plaster in the center part of the photograph, and a possible collapse wall inside the building on top of the floor. Post holes running east-west probably represent the structural part of the building itself. Eventually, we managed to remove this mixed material from the inside of the building, and once we remove that, we reveal two possible phases of flooring, one represented by reused roof tiles forming a tessellated floor, which will later replace with the construction of a clay slab, as we can see in this photograph. These slides show phase 3 features. So phase 3 features are basically the buildings. Opus signinum floor in the northwest corner of the site, and the clay and timber buildings, kind of a very approximate position of this south of the opus signinum floor of the masonry building. The road is still in use during this period, and this is phase 3, basically showing the location of the different buildings. During the late Roman period, the road went out of use. As I mentioned before, the road was sealed by a sequence of late Roman deposits, which they were in turn truncated by a number of features. One of these is located on the western side of the main east-west road, and you can see here some of the debris filling this large cut. There is a quantity of burnt daub and burnt material. Eventually we excavate more of the same feature, and as we can see in the next slide, it was a kind of very substantial feature, it represented by this dark sandy silt mixed with burnt material. Here we can see the part of the road still in place, but being truncated by this large feature. At the end of the excavation, this is what we have. So definitely the road was out of use by this stage. This large feature was still continuing underneath the level of the scale. So it's a very substantial feature, and it was filled with all different debris, which produce a number of industrial waste, which we'll see in the next slides. Here we can see an assemblage of glass, a mix of glass which was going to be reused, recycled, together with wastage, and also with the broken part of a tank metal, which is basically the base of a furnace. The feature we saw previously, it didn't produce any convincing evidence for in situ furnace, but it produced elements, debris, which are absolutely associated with glass production. Here we can see more of the same assemblage, some other interesting nicer fragments, such as we can see a twisted fragment of glass rod here, base of a vessel, of a glass vessel, possible handle of a vessel again, and a dark blue glass fragment on the right hand side. Also, not necessarily from the same feature, we also have this very nice example of a Millefiori bowl from the mid-1st century. Another interesting assemblage of finds from the same large feature was this assemblage of a fragment of crucible. This indicates that there was also some activity associated with metal working on site. One of the fragments here, the one visible here, seems to be an hemispherical form, a type tree with a pouring spot. So this also got to add up to the different activity, industrial activity carried out in this particular part of London. Immediately to the east of this large cut feature, we also found a sequence of late Roman deposits. Here we can see a very clear clay slab underneath the silt layer. Now, this is one of the very few in situ stratigraphic deposits which are possibly associated with industrial activity on site. We have quite a lot of sampling from these layers. One particular of note in this particular area is this concave circular shape, a clay-lined feature, which is sitting on top of a kind of a debris. Eventually, we excavate this sequence of layers, and we expose the clay slab, which was in turn truncated by many different features, which produce burn material, possibly associated with industrial activity. So the next step during the post-ex will be to understand the stratigraphy of this particular part of the site. Trying to understand what kind of industrial activity was carried out, either glass work or metal work. So these slides show phase 4 deposits, which are indicated by the red shadow here. this is a very approximate position of this industrial for these industrial dams or structures. Now, the road, as I said before, is here, but it wasn't used by during the late Roman period. Possibly the masonry building is not standing anymore during this period, but we will, especially in regard of the masonry building, we will probably try to get some more information during the post-ex. Here we got some finds from the excavation of the site. Here we have a open Roman oil lamp, a type 11 lamp, dating to the Flavian to mid-2nd century. The handle is missing, but is quite well preserved. Another interesting find was this pottery maker stamp, which is quite unusual, as you can see. So that was also kind of interesting find. Finally, I like to show the evidence, archaeological evidence, especially the structure and roads infrastructure in relation to nearby site of 2028 Moorgate. In this particular site, an east-west road was recorded. As you can see, our stretch of east-west road seems to correspond quite well with the orientation and position of the road previously found. As the last slide shows some our staff, which I would like to give a big thank you for their effort, hard work on site. Without them, it would have been possible to have this excavation. Thank you again.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ireneo. Jane, we've got time for one question. Have you got one at all? Otherwise, I will.
We do not have anything yet, so do go ahead, Harvey.
Okay, fine. Well, we've got a couple of minutes to lunch, and then we will be able to stop more or less on time. Ireneo, thank you very much. Again, it demonstrates to me, and probably to lots of us here, how difficult it is to interpret these sort of sites, partly because of the way that they've been truncated by activities in later periods. And also, I think you seem to have evidence of land use changes in there.
Yes.
A bit like Ali did in the previous lecture. And it does seem to me that really to understand these areas, all these individual contributions that archaeologists are making will really have to be tried to be sort of put together, so we can look at areas and see, for example, whether we're dealing with individual buildings or whether we're dealing with parts of big complexes, which maybe, we have them in the area, of course. We've obviously got the fort up towards the northwest, we've got the amphitheatre to the southeast and so on. And we don't, in many respects, we don't necessarily know what is actually happening in these areas and how much it does change through time. So I think all these are very interesting contributions. They show the importance of getting hold of these sites and investigating them. And of course, we have to compare that with, earlier years when many sites will have been destroyed without record. So, it'll help us to get a much better understanding of that, the Walbrook Valley. So, Ireneo, it's coming up to 1 o'clock now. I'm going to thank you very much for again contributing to our conferences. Thank the other speakers this morning. There will be information available for everyone to look at during the lunch break, but it's just hit 1 o'clock on my computer. So if everybody's happy, I'm going to suggest we stop now, that you get your full lunch break and come back to join us just before 2 o'clock. So